Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Michael McCarville, and this is Fun with Fallen Flags, episode 78. And we're going to go and do part 5 for the OPHIR Loop series. And this is the general merchandise store that you can see here in the Library of Congress photo in the lower left. Now, other than this, the photos that we're going to use are from the Friends of Cumbres and Toltec. And I want to thank those guys for allowing us to use those photos and put a little historical context in this. And this is going to be a Banta Modelworks kit. It is Banta Modelworks 109. So Bill Banta, thank you for allowing me to use this kit in the series, and it certainly helps to have the historical photos as well as the laser cut kit go together and complete the scene that we're working on. So let's talk about the history for a little bit. Real quick, there's going to be some notes down below. And as far as construction steps, and if you want to join the Facebook group HO Scale Tutorials that this appears in, or the YouTube video channel this appears in, feel free to subscribe and click the bell icon. You get updates as we go through all the different parts of the series. So once again, the history of this area is actually fairly interesting, because what you're going to see is this structure is actually not in its current location in this photo. This is a 1915 photo, roughly, and it's on the left side of the trestle, and that's not where it sits. The structure actually sits on the right side in that big empty spot next to that little building by the, I guess, the road embankment. So let me pull up where it sits. Alright, so this is where it sits now. Well, at the time we're modeling it, on the other side, on the outside curve of the OPHIR loop. And it's not there in the earlier photo. And you can tell it's the same building because the back side of it, the roof lines, are very distinctive. It has a very complex roof line. So, kind of interesting. But let me pull up a... so, Sanborn Insurance Company basically created these maps of different towns, especially like in the West, you can find a lot of them. What they did is they basically mapped out an area so any insurance company could say, hey, we want to subscribe to your service, and then we don't have to send insurance adjusters all over the place just to get one policy set up. So what they do is they map out these areas, and we can look in, and it's a good snapshot in time of what buildings were where. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to look. The first one is a map of OPHIR in 1899. Okay, so in the OPHIR area where the general merchandise store sits is actually the Glendale Hotel is sitting there, and that little shed behind it is still there. And then there's a general store just underneath it. And you might think that that's actually the same general store. But you'll notice in the next Sanborn map, the one in 1904, that general store and that Glendale Hotel no longer are there. Okay, so in this photo, the general store is actually, our general store is actually in the location that it sat in up to 1915. In that photo. So you see the Glendale Hotel's gone, and that smaller building, which was the general store, that's also gone. So this general merchandise building actually was built here and then moved across the tracks. Interestingly enough, if you go further to the left, there's a barber on trestles, which is in this map, but isn't on the previous photo, and it's not on later photos. So I've seen photos of that. It shows up and then it disappears. So there's a lot of stuff getting put nearer the depot for business, but they don't stay there for whatever reason. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and model this in its location outside the loop, because that's closer to the time frame that we want to have this appear. Okay, so we're back. We're back in 1940-ish time, and you can see that the main structures that are in this area, in addition to the the general store, the merchandise store that we're modeling, and you can see the two cars in front of it. The Oilton Club Saloon, which we did in our last part of this series, is up on the upper right. Mrs. Skillen's store, which is directly above the building that we're going to model, is up, and that one's actually next. Then you see a depot to the left. Past that you see the tramway, and then underneath the tramway is where the outhouse was that we did in one of the first episodes. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the kit. So the parts for the kit are laid out here on our workspace, and you can see 4 pages of instructions, roofing material, some decals below that, windows and dimensional lumber below that. Then in the center row we've got some of the walls, and at the bottom is some additional wall sections, and then a cardboard roofing material, which is basically just a thin cardboard. On the next row over is the flooring and wall sections. There's also a basement, couple walls in this too. And then in the far right is the door and window sheets. So what we have here is the external walls for the first floor, and there's 2 internal walls as well. So it's a very complex structure as far as roofs go. So what you see is on the very top, that's the front wall, and be careful because I actually broke that into a couple of pieces and had to repair it. That's actually 2 different pieces, the A-frame triangular piece and then the first floor piece, and you can see that it's replicated as you go down. There's 2 center walls that have those A-frames that actually attach. Now the material, mine is an older kit, so the wood panels were starting to curl a little bit, so you'll see as we go through the kit I have actually added a lot of internal bracing on it. And then if there's a wall section that the wood grain is going one direction, then the brace section needs to go perpendicular. And in the material list below in notes you'll see all that, what we used, but the Titebond III is the glue for all the wood sections. It's basically Titebond, but it's waterproof. So I like to use it just in case there's any water or scenery application or anything like that that happens to get on the structure. So once this piece is all put together, then we can do the flooring as well. I basically did this in a bunch of sub-assemblies. I didn't really I followed the instructions a little bit, but I kind of went my own way, just basically on ease of construction. So this is the floor sections. On the left is the laser etched pieces, and then on the right is the kind of subfloor, and then there's 2 basement pieces. Now I didn't put the basement pieces on until later because I wanted to work on this and not have it be on an uneven platform. So because there's only those 2 pieces, if you want to put the basement on now, that's fine, and then you're going to have to put something else on the other side of it to balance it out so it sits flat while you're working on it, or put it on a book or something. I don't know. I just waited to put those 2 basement pieces on last because I didn't want to have to mess with having the building on an uneven surface. Here's a couple of sub-assemblies, just basically using the framing square that I have on my desk to square everything up as it dries, and then I use clamps as depending on which step I'm on, whether it's gluing a wall section or the bracing for cross bracing on any of the pieces. So I use those red clips. I also use binder clips from office supply places too. I find those really handy, especially if you're gluing 2 flat pieces together. Okay, I've got the wall sections basically glued together. You can see a few pieces of cross bracing in there. Now, since I damaged the front piece, I went ahead and painted it. And if you follow the instructions at this point, the wall section would actually have the windows in it, and then it would have the decals on it. But since I had broken it, I wanted to go ahead and make sure everything was nice and square before I did any more work. So it is, and so at this point I've started painting the structure, and then I'm starting to decal it, and I'm building windows off on the side. All the funky roofs on this structure, you can see on the back side of it, you can see there's a going to be a lot of different angles and slopes and compound roofs. So this thing has a lot of really interesting roof lines to it. So this is the back view, and then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the top floor, which is a small little section, but it does sit in these, there's two notches on the main opening, that main store area. You see there's a notch on the top of each of the two walls. The next section that we're going to build, actually, the base piece sits on top of those two notches. This is the pieces that we're going to use to build the top floor. And top floor is not very big, but it does have some of these triangle pieces that are built into it, which is going to help us construct the roof and line everything up properly. And this is that section all glued together. Now you'll notice that the siding is on the outside of those windows, and that makes sense, but these two A-frame pieces actually cover up a lot of the siding material, and that's okay, because all we really need is those two dormers to sit outside the roof sections, and then this is just basically makes it easier. Now my pieces were pretty curved, and if you look closely you can see a few of the pieces, the siding pieces have a few cross brace pieces glued in there. And again, that's just Titebond III with some thicker scrap material that I had laying around. And then the base plate actually has a couple pieces too, because as I started gluing it, it started to curl a little bit. So I just basically put two pieces underneath it, clamped it down with some Titebond III, and it came right back into shape, nice and flat. We're looking at the two sub-assemblies with a nice even coat of flat white. Now the front of the structure where I'm going to put the decals on, I've actually coated that with a clear coat so that the decals adhere a little bit better than they would for just flat paint. Flat will tend to give that kind of a silvery scaly look to decals. So the two structures are painted, and we're going to go ahead and stain all the flooring and decking material. So for staining, again, similar to a lot of the other kits that we've put together, the deck material got a wash of 10:1 isopropyl alcohol to India ink, and it gives it kind of a driftwood sort of aged wood look. Now you can use other stains, or even add a oil based wash over the top of this and give it a little bit of color, but based on the altitude it sits at and the look that I was going for, I'm basically just going to give it this one wash, and then I'm happy with the way it looks. Now you'll notice that the interior got stained, even though I'm not going to detail it. That way, in case anybody looks inside, they can see that the floor isn't just flat, featureless, unstained basswood. But the outside actually got a second coat of the alcohol and India ink wash, and you can tell the difference in tone. So if one of them looks better than the other, go for that. I like it being a little dirtier and than just kind of that light, hazy driftwood look. So that's the reason why I gave it a second coat. You'll notice that there is chunks missing from that front step. Now, if you look at the Library of Congress photo in the very beginning, you'll notice that to the right there wasn't a step because there's actually a gas pump sitting there, and to the left, that step didn't go all the way over to where the stairway leads up and away from the structure. So I just mirrored what that is. If you don't like that and you want to keep the step running all the way across, then by all means do that. But it was a quick modification, didn't really take much, and it's going to make photos of this structure match the photos of the ones that we already have. So let's go ahead and jump over to some of the window assemblies, and we'll get the decals put on as well. So moving through the windows, getting those in place. I've got the front wall pieces in place. Now the decal for general merchandise, it's actually not a clear decal. It's kind of strange. It's general merchandise printed out on white. So unless you paint the structure white, then it's going to look a little strange because it's going to be the name and then however you cut it out with a white background. So fortunately, I decided to stick with white, just like the kit and the real structure is. And so it's difficult to see the lines, but it is a little strange. So anyway, the decals are put on the front, and I'm going to shoot it with dull coat. I'm just letting it completely dry. I don't want to dull coat it over if there's any kind of moisture underneath it. That, and I am moving through the windows, getting those put on, and there is some deck pieces and some stairways that I'm working on building. So I'm trying to get all that stuff done, and then we'll attack the roof. So let me finish up the windows, and let me and one note about the windows, I haven't put the acetate on the big ones, but as I put the smaller ones around towards the back, I am putting the acetate on those because they're going to be a real pain to get into. So I'm going to dull coat this without the acetate in, and then I'll put the acetate on after that's done, because I don't want dull coat on top of glass. That would look horrible. So anyway, oh, and one other thing I noticed that there is a way to mount that that top floor with the dormers on it and the roof. It sits in those two little tabs like I showed earlier on the sidewalls. That does not have to be mounted permanently. That can just be set on there, so I can come back at a later time and do the interior, which is awesome. I was wondering how I was going to get back in if I was going to do it. So it's actually made to do that. So I'll show that one later on when I can pull the top off. But we're going to go ahead and get the rest of the windows put in, dull coat the front of this, and then put the rest of the acetate in. And I'm going to finish the deck, and I'll show you the decks when those are done. Okay, so the windows on the front are done, the windows on the back are done, the acetate's been added, and I put a little bit of glue on the inside, so just so it wouldn't show, but to reinforce the windows on the inside, wherever I could access it, so I don't worry about accidentally having the windows, pull off or anything. It's not really going to get handled once it's added to the layout, but I just want to make sure everything's nice and solid. So you can also see the deck on the right side there. So let me give you a little bit better shot of the deck. So here we're looking at the deck now, and it's around behind the shed. And it's basically just a piece of scribed material with a little bit of a frame underneath, and then we'll add legs to it here in a little bit. But this scribe material also coincides with a piece of scribe material that's on top of the shed, and it looks good, but the shed roof still needs to be covered. So what I did was I added a little bit of tar paper to it, curled it up with a rounded toothpick, but you can also see the stained boards, the weathered boards underneath it. So I didn't want to just cover the whole thing with tar paper after, staining it, and so it looks like aged wood. I really wanted to add something on top of it, but allow it to the scribing of the boards to show through. So that's done, and next up is we're heading towards the other wall that hasn't been finished. So it's simple tar paper. I actually cut the strips in half, so they're about, instead of 7 feet, they're about 3.5 feet scale HO wide. And you can see that I just painted it with a kind of a faded black craft paint that I have, and it looks good. I'll probably add a little bit of maybe some streaking or just a little bit of light weathering, but really not much, because this whole wall is going to be above the foundation, above the basement, so it's not going to be right next to the ground. After this, it's time to start the roofs. Now the roof on the back sides are basically a lot like what's over the shed, just tar paper. But they've got this hexagon shaped shingle, a very ornate shingle that goes on the main roof. And I drew some, there's already horizontal lines for alignment, but I drew a couple of vertical lines on the edges. And what that does is allow me to line up the kind of three, almost a hexagon pattern when you're done. I could line up each of the rows so that the hexagon pattern was nice and straight and didn't veer or anything. So that's done. Don't forget you have to do the two dormers as well. So those are done. And you'll notice that at the very crest where the roof on the dormers and the main roof bends, we're going to go ahead and cover that like we did with some of the other models with just a thin strip of paper just to kind of crease it down the center and then make it so it covers up the edges, and then that's just going to be the cap to the roofs. So next step is I'm going to go ahead and glue the roof on top of the second floor and the dormers, put these on top of that, and then paint the underside of it black, of the underside of the roof edges, and then paint the roof shingles a lighter color, kind of a grayish color. Some of the shingles almost look like, in some of the prototype shots, they almost look like it's a gray with a bit of a tint of like green, but I'm not sure if that's just the old color photos or what. So I'm going to go with kind of a light gray and just see how that looks, and if I'm happy with it, I'll just leave it. So let me go ahead and finish. I'll put the roof together and then paint it, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so let's talk about the roof. So the roof section on the back is done. There's actually 3 separate roofs here. There's the board and batten shed short wall on the far left, the larger one to the right of it, and then that tall peak roof as well. Where that tall peak roof meets that larger roof section below it, I've filled in that gap between the two with a little bead of glue, and then when I had painted the roof sections before I glued them on, and then I filled that gap in, came back and just touched up over that gap with the painted over the glue that I had used to fill that gap. And I actually used Tamiya putty on top of it because the glue just kept, as it would dry, it would shrink. So I went ahead and filled it with putty. But anyway, that all got glued and then dried and then painted. So it's kind of an off. It's a craft paint. It's the same one. It's actually the same one that I used for the Oilton Club Saloon that we built previously. It gives the tar paper a good look. It's also the same color of the tar paper on the left wall, the wall that we actually can't see. So anyway, that's that roof. So let's talk about the main roof. So you want to line up the dormers, make sure the dormers are nice and straight in alignment with each other. And again, the place where the dormer meets the roof, there's going to be a little bit of a gap there. So all I did was I shingled all the way to the end and shingled underneath it, and I shingled all the way to the end of the dormer piece. And then when I glued it in place, there's just a little smooth section where the putty went into that gap where those two meet. And then one of the other things I did to kind of disguise that a little bit is I put a little bit of chalk dust when I weathered it. And excuse me. So what I did was I wanted it to look like there's a lot of runoff there. Also the chimney, that's going to have a lot of runoff. And the prototype actually shows there's a lot of grime on the roof in different places, but especially off the chimney. So just to get a little differentiation, I weathered the roof. That's all chalk powders with Dullcoat on top of it. Make sure you cover the windows before you spray Dullcoat. This is a lot of difficult steps because you're constantly saying, okay, I'm going to paint the roof in advance, but when I put it together, I'm going to have to come back and paint it again. So I have to mask everything off while everything's glued up, and then I putty the cracks. And so there's a lot of planning that goes on in this process. The roof is actually one of the more difficult steps to this. But again, mask off your windows. I got a little bit of Dullcoat on one of my windows, so I had to go back over it with just a gentle thinner and clean it off. But also another thing that we did, you'll notice on the upstairs windows, if you look at the prototype photos, there's shades on there, but there's curtains on there too. So you can choose which one you want to use or both. There's also shades on the windows on the downstairs on the front of the general merchant, underneath where it says general merchandise. Underneath there, I've seen photos where those windows half covered halfway down with window shades, all different you know places. So some are all the way down to the middle bar, other ones are up a little ways, so you can kind of play around with it. I just decided to go with shades on the front and then leave most of the big windows on the front. Most of those windows don't have shades on them in most of the pictures, so that's what I went with. So but the roof's done. The chimney is getting painted, and it's just rust. It's primered. It's a soft metal casting, primered, rust red color, basically a Testors rust color that I used. And then I smeared some craft paint into the crevices, and then went and dry brushed over it the same rust color on top of it, so that you can see it. You'll see it here at the end, but I'm going to put that on last because I don't want to add it because it's going to snap off if I'm constantly working on it. We haven't even done the foundation yet. So there are trim boards on the very front of the structure, and these aren't the ones on the ends of the roof. These are actually up against the wall. And if you look at the prototype photos, you'll notice that the trim boards actually have cutouts where the actual upstairs windows are. So on the front of the structure, I had to make two little cutouts after I measured the trim boards. Measured them, painted them black, just test them to fit, and then I'm going to come back and touch this up along with all the other trim boards with a little bit of flat black. Any place that got nicked or didn't get a good coat of paint the first time or has a little bit of glue residue on it. So I'm going to go around and do that. So that's one of the windows, and since we're here, I might as well show you the other window. So that's the other side. You can see through. There's a little bit of a place where I cut into the wood, so I'm going to come back and paint that as I just go around and touch up the entire roof section. Any place really that's flat black that's got worn off. So at this point, we have a few things left to do, but they're all fairly minor. We have the chimney to add, and it's actually done. I painted it with, like we talked about, but I added a little bit of flashing around the bottom just with paint. I didn't do any kind of material. So it's going to sit in there, and it's going to look like there's flashing on it. I'll do that later as one of the last steps because I don't want it to get snapped off because I'm still working on the foundation. So there's two boards for the foundation. I'm going to go ahead and glue those together, paint them the what is it? The Valejo grimy engine grime, it's called, and it makes a really good concrete color. And then I'll do a little bit of weathering on that, not much. We also have the two tire signs on the right and left side. We have to add that, and then there's a stairway just off the shed, just to the left out of sight of the picture. Glue that down to the floorboards and just put some railing on it. And then there's a walkway. We're looking at the dormer that has the window in it. The other dormer has a door in it, and then that door opens out onto a platform which goes over to a raised road, an embankment that sits right behind this building. So this building sits right up against a retaining wall, and then there's a road up behind it. So it's a little weird, but that doorway goes out of this building and onto that roadway, that embankment, from the upstairs of this house, this living quarters on the top floor. So and then there's a little step down that goes onto the deck as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add all those one-off little detail pieces, and then after all those get done, we'll go ahead and take a 360 view of this, and I'm just looking to see if I'm missing anything. No, I think that's it. So just all those one-off little details, and then touch-up paint of the black. I'll finish all that, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the final product. In no particular order, we're going to go through the last few views of this structure. So starting out, we're going to look at the foundation. Now it's just simply 2 pieces of wood. I did brace the interior of it, the corner, so it was nice and sturdy, and then just squared it up on the base. Now there was, underneath the white, there was a little bit of wood stained material. Remember those pieces that we sandwiched together? I just painted that gray to make it all look like foundation and match the real structure. So moving on, the chimney is in place, and again, a lot like the similar previous chimneys that we've done. We'd already done the roof, weathering it, so it just got glued in. I used Walther's glue on that just to stick it in place. And again, we had put the material underneath the A-frame, so I wouldn't be able to push it all the way through. So, and when I poured the Walther's glue, it made a nice little repository for that to settle in, push the chimney in, and it's good. Moving on, you remember the dormer on the one side of the building, the uphill side. Actually, that dormer has a doorway in it, and it leads over to the raised embankment where the road is. So all of that got built, and then there's a stairway that comes off of that and goes down to the deck. So that's in place. Also going uphill is the stairway on the left side of the entrance, and you'll notice that the steps are not painted. They're just the wood material, but the handrails are black and the rest of it is white. So I did that afterwards. I didn't even mask off the steps. I just laid it on its side and aimed away from, put the treads of the stairs away from me and just shot it, just to make sure that I just did it real light so it wouldn't hit the treads, and that way I didn't have to mask it. So a little tricky, but if you're uncomfortable doing that, just go ahead and mask it off. I painted the boards separately and then glued them on last. So this was a little tricky to make sure everything was lined up straight, but once it's on there, I'm not going to have to look at it ever again, so I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. And again, this goes up the hill and hits there's a stone embankment on the left side of what we're looking at, and then these two are going to actually jump out onto the road. And then we have the final shot. So this is it. This is what it looks like. We just went all around it. This is the final view. You can see that little support underneath. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Oh, and one more thing. I did do the 2 Gates tire signs on the left and right. I stuck those in there. There's also a really small trim board that you really can't see. It's underneath the general merchandise. It matches the original building. And then just to break it up a little bit, I put a little shade on one of the doors, just so that there was a little bit of variety on that. Plus, I put my finger through the acetate window, so I had to take the door off anyway, and I said, while I'm here, I might as well jazz it up a little bit. So that's it. I want you guys to know that I appreciate you guys watching, especially all the way to the end. Thanks again, and thanks to Bill Banta for Banta Modelworks allowing me to feature this kit in this video, and then the friends of Cumbres and Toltec. Couldn't do this without you. Matter of fact, let's take a quick look at see how we did compared to the real thing. And let me make it so you can see it. And that's it. Not bad. Once again, thanks to the friends of Cumbres and Toltec for allowing me to use that photo among many others. So make sure you guys are subscribed and join the Facebook group. I'll put all the notes down below as usual. Check that stuff out, and I will look forward to working with you again on the next project, which I don't know what it is yet, but I got a couple of things on the bench. So on to the next. Thanks, you guys.